Sir, can you explain why this scan flagged your bag?
It's maritime equipment, officer, nothing illegal.
Then why are you carrying this much cash with it?
Am I being detained or is this just a screening?
Imagine the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the faint smell of stale coffee, floor wax, and the quiet, collective anxiety of hundreds of people rushing to be somewhere else. It is a Tuesday morning at a major international airport on the eastern seaboard. The lines are moving steadily. People are kicking off their shoes, tossing their laptops into gray plastic bins, and stepping through the millimeter wave scanners with their hands raised, surrendered to the routine of modern travel. For most, this is a minor, forgettable inconvenience. You take off your belt, you empty your pockets, you get your bag, and you go to your gate. But what happens when the routine breaks? What happens when the system designed to keep us safe suddenly turns its immense bureaucratic weight onto you? Not because of what you have done, but because of a cascade of subtle assumptions, biases, and a fundamental breakdown in legal procedure. Today, we are looking at the story of Captain Marcus Vance. It is a story about the fragile line between security and civil rights, the insidious nature of confirmation bias, and the terrifying reality of what happens when the people enforcing the rules forget the Constitution that governs them. Marcus Vance is a 48-year-old master mariner. For 20 years, he has navigated massive commercial freight vessels across the Pacific and the Atlantic. He is a man who lives his life by the book because, in his line of work, the ocean does not forgive mistakes. He is disciplined, soft-spoken, and meticulously organized. He is also a black man. On this particular Tuesday, Marcus is flying home to Seattle after concluding a 3-month contract in Miami. He is tired, but he is in good spirits. He is wearing a comfortable, neutral travel outfit, a dark quarter-zip sweater, well-fitted jeans, and slip-on loafers. His carry-on is a heavy-duty, waterproof Pelican case, the kind favored by photographers, military personnel, and naturally, maritime professionals. Inside that case is the lifeblood of his profession. He places the Pelican case onto the conveyor belt. It slides past the heavy lead curtains and into the X-ray machine. Marcus steps through the body scanner. The machine flashes green. He is cleared. He walks to the end of the conveyor belt to wait for his bag, but the bag does not come out. Instead, a TSA agent sitting behind the monitor stops the belt. The agent leans in, squinting at the screen. The image on the monitor shows a dense cluster of electronics, wires, a heavy metallic object, and several thick stacks of paper. To the untrained eye, or an eye actively looking for threats, it looks complicated. It looks suspicious. The agent pushes a button, and the Pelican case is diverted down a secondary track toward a stainless steel inspection table. Marcus sees this and sighs inwardly. He is used to this. His bag contains his personal EPIRB, an emergency position indicating radio beacon, a satellite phone, a brass sextant he inherited from his mentor, and a logbook wrapped in waterproof casing. It also contains $9,000 in cash, his accumulated hazard pay and shore leave per diem that he prefers to carry on his person, rather than trust to an international wire transfer from a foreign shipping company. He knows the electronics look strange on the X-ray. He is fully prepared to explain them. A different TSA agent, a younger man with a tight haircut and an impatient demeanor, picks up the case. He looks at Marcus, then down at the bag, then back at Marcus. The agent asks if the bag belongs to him. Marcus replies calmly, confirming it is his. The agent asks if there is anything sharp, dangerous, or fragile inside. Marcus says no, just specialized maritime equipment and navigation tools. The agent unlatches the case and opens it. He begins swabbing the electronics with a small white cloth, a routine test for explosive residue. He places the cloth into the ion mobility spectrometry machine. Marcus checks his watch. He still has an hour before boarding. He is not worried. Then the machine beeps loudly. The screen flashes red. It is a positive hit for nitrates. Let us pause here for a moment. Nitrates are found in explosives, yes, but they are also heavily present in agricultural fertilizers, heart medications, and, crucially for Marcus, certain heavy-duty marine varnishes and anti-corrosive sprays used daily on commercial ships. A false positive on an explosive trace detector is not uncommon. Legally and procedurally, this positive hit gives the TSA the right and the obligation to conduct a more thorough search of the bag and the passenger to ensure there is no threat to aviation safety. This falls under the administrative search doctrine, an exception to the Fourth Amendment that allows security screenings without a warrant because the primary goal is flight safety, not law enforcement. But this is where the procedure begins to fracture. The young agent's posture changes completely. He steps back from the bag, his hand resting instinctively near his radio. He doesn't ask Marcus about his recent whereabouts or if he has been in contact with chemicals. Instead, he looks at the expensive gear, the thick stacks of $100 bills secured with rubber bands, and then he looks at Marcus. The agent's mind makes a rapid subconscious leap. He doesn't see a ship captain. The bias, implicit and unexamined, fills in the blanks. High-end electronics, a massive amount of cash, a positive chemical swab, and a black man traveling alone. The agent assumes he is looking at a drug runner or someone involved in organized crime. The agent radios for a supervisor. Within moments, a TSA supervisor arrives, accompanied by a uniformed airport police officer. The atmosphere around the stainless steel table instantly thickens. The casual noise of the airport seems to fade, replaced by a tense, hyper-focused bubble around Marcus. The supervisor, a woman with a stern expression, looks at the open case. "Is this your cash, sir?" she asks, her tone accusatory rather than inquiring. "Yes, it is," Marcus replies, keeping his voice even. "I am a commercial ship captain. I just disembarked from a 3-month voyage. That is my per diem and hazard pay." The supervisor exchanges a look with the police officer. It is a look of profound skepticism. The police officer steps forward, placing a hand on his duty belt. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us to a private screening room." Marcus knows his rights. He knows the law. "Am I under arrest?" he asks, his voice steady. "No, sir," the officer replies, "but we need to ask you some questions and do a full pat-down." "I understand you need to clear the bag for explosives," Marcus says. "You can search the bag, but my cash and my profession have nothing to do with aviation security. Am I legally required to go to the back room, or are you asking?" This is the critical juncture. Under the Fourth Amendment, an administrative search at an airport must be strictly limited to finding weapons or explosives. If the TSA and police want to detain someone beyond the scope of that security screening, if they want to investigate money laundering, drug trafficking, or general crime, they need something called reasonable suspicion. Reasonable suspicion requires specific, articulable facts that suggest a crime is occurring. It cannot be based on a hunch, and it certainly cannot be based on the color of a man's skin or the fact that he is carrying a legal amount of cash under the $10,000 reporting limit. The officer's jaw tightens. "Sir, if you don't cooperate, we will consider you a threat to the airport and you will be detained. Walk this way." Marcus, knowing that arguing with an armed officer in the middle of an airport terminal is a losing battle, picks up his jacket. He is escorted away from the public eye, marched through a heavy wooden door into a windowless, concrete-walled room. The door clicks shut behind them. The claustrophobia is immediate. Inside the room, the dynamic shifts from a security screening to an interrogation. The TSA supervisor and the police officer stand between Marcus and the door. The officer crosses his arms. "Sit down," the officer says. Marcus remains standing. "I'd prefer to stand. Can we get this over with? My flight board's in 40 minutes. "You're not making that flight," the supervisor says flatly, dumping the contents of his Pelican case onto a metal table. She begins thumbing through the stacks of cash, not looking for explosives, but counting the money. "What is the probable cause for detaining me?" Marcus asks. "You had a false positive on a chemical swab. I explained I work on ships. The gear in that bag is maritime equipment. The cash is under the legal limit to fly domestically. What exactly are you investigating?" The police officer steps closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "We're investigating why a guy like you is carrying this kind of hardware and this much cash. You say you're a ship captain. Do you have a badge, an ID?" "I have my transportation worker identification credential, my TWIC card, right there in the front pocket," Marcus says, pointing to his wallet on the table. "I also have my master's license issued by the United States Coast Guard." The supervisor finds the cards. She looks at them, turning them over in her hands. The TWIC card is a federal security clearance. It requires an extensive background check by the very same Department of Homeland Security that oversees the TSA. It is undeniable proof of his identity and his security clearance. But confirmation bias is a powerful, blinding force. When people form an initial assumption, they tend to filter all new information in a way that supports their original belief, while ignoring evidence that contradicts it. The officers had already decided Marcus was a suspect. The federal ID didn't make them realize their mistake. It made them suspicious of the ID. "Anybody can fake a card," the officer mutters. "Where are you really coming from?" For the next 45 minutes, Marcus is subjected to a relentless barrage of questioning. They ask about his family, his finances, his travel history. They ask why his hands are calloused. They ask why he doesn't use a bank. They strip search his jacket, running their hands aggressively along the seams. They bring in a drug-sniffing dog to circle his bag and his person. The dog alerts to absolutely nothing. Through it all, Marcus remains intensely calm. He does not raise his voice. He does not swear. He answers their questions with precise, factual statements. He understands the psychology of the room. He knows that any display of righteous anger, any expression of the deep humiliation he is feeling, will be immediately weaponized against him. It will be labeled as erratic behavior, used to retroactively justify the illegal detention. He is forced to manage their emotions, to de-escalate the authorities who are actively violating his civil rights. The turning point comes not with an apology, but with a quiet, uncomfortable realization by the authorities. The police officer makes a phone call to a Coast Guard registry line, running the serial number on Marcus's master license. The operator confirms, unequivocally, that Marcus Vance is an active, highly decorated commercial captain. Furthermore, the TSA supervisor finally runs the swab through a more advanced secondary mass spectrometer. It confirms the presence of marine-grade polyurethane, not a bomb-making material. There are no drugs. There are no weapons. There is no money laundering. There is only a man, his legally obtained belongings, and a massive procedural failure. The door to the interrogation room opens. The police officer walks back in, looking visibly uncomfortable. He does not meet Marcus's eyes. He gestures to the table. "You can pack up your things," the officer says gruffly. Marcus slowly gathers his cash, his navigational tools, and his federal IDs. He places them back into the Pelican case, securing the latches. He looks at the supervisor and the officer. "Am I free to go?" Marcus asks. "Yeah, you're clear," the supervisor says, already turning her back to him to fill out a piece of paperwork. "No apology?" Marcus asks, his voice dropping an octave, the sheer weight of the last hour finally bleeding into his tone. "You held me for an hour. You missed my flight. You accused me of federal crimes without a single piece of evidence beyond a false positive that you refused to investigate properly. You saw a black man with cash and made a choice." "We were following protocol, sir, keeping the skies safe," the officer replies defensively, resorting to the standard, impenetrable shield of institutional bureaucracy. "Have a good day." Marcus walks out of the room. The terminal is just as he left it. The fluorescent lights are still humming. The lines are still moving. People are still buying expensive coffee and checking the departure boards. But for Marcus, the reality of the space has shifted. He has just been reminded, in the most visceral way possible, that the presumption of innocence is a conditional privilege. He walks to his gate. His flight has been gone for 20 minutes. He has to wait 6 hours for the next one, paying a rebooking fee out of his own pocket. He sits in the hard, plastic terminal chair, the adrenaline slowly leaving his body, replaced by a cold, heavy exhaustion. In a standard Hollywood movie, this is the moment where Marcus makes a phone call, hires a bulldog lawyer, and the next scene cuts to a courtroom where the corrupt officials are publicly fired and humiliated. But in reality, the aftermath of civil rights violations is a slow, grueling war of attrition. When Marcus returns home to Seattle, he does not let it go. He files a formal complaint with the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General. He submits a detailed narrative, citing the specific timestamps, the names of the officers, the exact nature of his maritime equipment, and the precise moment the encounter shifted from a lawful administrative search to an unlawful detention under the Fourth Amendment. He hires a civil rights attorney. They draft a letter outlining the Terry v. Ohio standard for reasonable suspicion, pointing out that the officers detained him for nearly an hour to investigate non-aviation-related crimes without a single articulable fact to support their suspicion. The attorney argues that the detention was heavily influenced by racial profiling, masked thinly by the excuse of a false positive chemical swab. For months, there is silence. The federal bureaucracy is a machine designed to protect itself. Initial responses from the TSA are boilerplate, stating that all procedures were followed and that agents acted within their broad discretionary powers to ensure passenger safety. They claim the cash and the unusual electronics justified the prolonged detention. But Marcus and his attorney push harder. They file Freedom of Information Act requests for the security camera footage and the internal logs from the secondary screening room. When the footage is finally released, it paints a damning picture. It shows the initial X-ray flag, the swab, and then the immediate aggressive escalation. It shows the officers completely ignoring Marcus's valid federal ID for nearly 40 minutes. It visually documents the reality that the officers were not looking for a bomb. They were looking for a reason to justify the assumption they had already made. Eventually, the Office of Inspector General formally opens an investigation into the incident. The investigation does not make national headlines. There are no protests in the streets. But inside the administrative ecosystem of the airport, the gears begin to grind. The inquiry reveals a pattern. It turns out the same supervisor and the same officer had a statistically significant history of diverting minority passengers carrying cash into the back room under the guise of random selection or ambiguous chemical swabs. The consequences when they finally arrive are quiet and bureaucratic. The TSA supervisor is reassigned and eventually takes early retirement. The airport police officer faces an internal affairs review and is quietly transferred off the airport detail to a desk job in a different precinct. The TSA issues a revised training memo to the region regarding the handling of specialized occupational equipment and the strict boundaries of administrative searches. Marcus receives a settlement from the city regarding the actions of the police officer, though the federal government, shielded by qualified immunity, admits no formal wrongdoing. This is the reality of procedural justice. It is rarely loud. It is rarely completely satisfying. It is fought in paperwork, in FOIA requests, and in the quiet resilience of people who refuse to be treated as suspects simply for existing. Marcus Vance still sails. He still flies through Miami International Airport. He still carries his heavy, waterproof Pelican case. But now, when he steps through the scanner, he carries the invisible weight of knowing exactly how quickly the system can turn against him. He knows that the rules written on paper are only as strong as the integrity of the people enforcing them. The story of Captain Marcus Vance leaves us looking at the systems we interact with every day. We trade a certain amount of privacy for the promise of security. We agree to the X-rays, the metal detectors, and the swabs because we want to believe the system is blind, logical, and fair. But systems are operated by human beings, and human beings bring their shadows with them to work. When the people empowered to protect us view the Constitution not as a boundary but as an obstacle to be circumvented through vague assumptions and unexamined biases, we are not actually safer. We are just surrendering our rights to the arbitrary judgment of the person wearing the badge on any given Tuesday. If an innocent man carrying valid federal credentials can be locked in a windowless room because of the color of his skin and the contents of his wallet, we have to ask ourselves, how secure is the foundation of our civil liberties? And the next time you are standing in that security line, taking off your shoes and emptying your pockets, ask yourself, if the machine beeps and the routine breaks, who will they assume you are?